Hello, fellow griever, and welcome to our daily nugget reading of the Daily Stoic. Today is January 7th. The title of today's reading is 7 Clear Functions of the Mind. The proper work of the mind is the exercise of choice, refusal, yearning, repulsion, preparation, purpose, and assent. What then can pollute and clog the mind's proper functioning? Nothing but its own corrupt decisions. That's from Epictetus Discourses. Now let's break down each one of those tasks. Choice, to do and think right. Refusal of temptation. Yearning, to do better. Repulsion, of negativity, of bad influences, and what isn't true. Preparation for what lies ahead and whatever may happen. Purpose, our guiding principle and highest priority. Assent, to be free of deception about what's inside and outside of our control, and to be ready to accept the latter. This is what the mind is here to do. We must make sure that it does, and see everything else as pollution and corruption. That's today's reading. And my brief take on that is, again, I see so many valuable teachings in Stoicism as they apply to life after grief, life during grief, life after loss. And for me, when I break these down, the choice, refusal, yearning, repulsion, preparation, purpose, and assent, in the grief world, I look at choice, and what Ryan Holiday and Stephen Hanselman say here is to do and think right. And for me, choice is about making choices to do, to engage in our grief process, to engage in our trauma healing process. Refusal of temptation is what they say. And I would take that a step further. I would say refusal of temptation to do nothing. Refusal of temptation to just give in. And giving in isn't the same as allowing ourselves a moment, because I always say sometimes we have to allow ourselves to sit in the suck. So I'm not talking about those moments. I'm talking about the overarching refusal that sometimes we find ourselves stuck in when we're just tempted to do nothing, to just hope that time will take care of it. And I'm here to tell you, fellow grievers, time alone doesn't do anything. I'm going to go back to that first word. It's the choices we make with that time that matter. So refusal is important, not refusing to engage. Yearning to be better. I think most of us, that's a given. We yearn to feel better. So that's kind of self-explanatory. Repulsion of negativity, of bad influence, and what isn't true. I think we have to be vigilant about that in our lost journey after suicide, because there is so much negativity. There's so many influences that are not accurate. There's so much information out there, misinformation that just isn't true about suicide loss, about people that die by suicide, about those of us that are left behind grieving. And so I think repelling those things is super important in this journey. Preparation for what lies ahead or whatever may happen. We have an obligation to ourselves, if we are going to do this in a healthy way, to prepare for what we can. And that might mean involving yourself in support communities, with therapists, in groups, places where you can prepare yourself the best that you possibly can for the grief journey and the healing of the trauma journey that lies ahead. Purpose, our guiding principle and highest priority. That one, grievers, can be harder to come to, because especially if we feel like our life has lost its purpose with our loved one dying, we can really be in a struggle on that, to find that purpose. But fighting just a guiding principle is really important in keeping our focus on what matters while we're grieving. So for me in the beginning, my purpose was my living family. It was my other children. It was my spouse. And that was enough in the beginning. My purpose later became because I deserved to have dreams and joy again and things like that. But our purpose doesn't have to start big. It can start small. And then the final one, the ascent, which they say to be free of deception about what's inside and outside our control and be ready to accept the latter. I think ascent is important because it kind of goes back to that repulsion where we're repelling negativity and bad influence or things that aren't true. In our ascent to be free of deception and understanding what's inside our control and outside, which is such a big principle of Stoicism in general. Sometimes I had to journal about this. I had to write things, affirmations in places to remind myself what I could control and what I couldn't. In other words, what just is and what I can do in response to that. Because we don't, unfortunately, get any control over what happens to us most of the time. We only get to control how we respond, and that's what the ascent piece is talking about. That. So, to this mind, as he concludes, this is here to do. We must make sure that it does and see everything else as pollution and corruption. Until tomorrow, see you soon.